Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So Lee's discussing a potential new Linux laptop.
Yes, I've never heard of this company. They've been around for a little while. It's called Malaval. You can get the laptop with, you can configure it. You know, of course, the price goes up as you configure it in different ways.
Yeah.
It comes with Intel processor, but I believe you can substitute a Ryzen processor. It comes with either Intel or NVIDIA graphics. You can pick the size of your SSD. They're all crucial, apparently.
I think SSDs are crucial enough.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can put in Ubuntu Cinnamon, Linux Mint, Windows 11 Home, Windows 11 Pro, or none.
Interesting.
Is okay. So, and you can get Linux, you can get liquid metal cooling for it. But Jack W, what is his name? At Tech Radar review, not Tech Republic reviewed it.
Yeah.
And said he really liked it. He would spend money on it if he had the money to spend. So he said.
So what type of money are we talking about?
Base model for this particular laptop is 1,200. It is 14-inch, 2880 by 1800 matte screen. Intel Core i5 processor, 2.5 to 4.5 gigahertz, 8 gigs of RAM, Intel Xe graphics,
Built-in
500
graphics. Okay.
storage. So it's kind of standard. So, and of course, you can get an extended warranty too. But I've heard lots of good things about this. So, okay, do we have somebody else want to get in? No.
No, I'm watching it since you're
My
talking.
job. Yeah.
You're just hearing a ding. That's the wrong kind of ding.
Yeah, but yeah, I'll let him in. John's waiting.
I got it.
I got him too. All right.
So, and of course, there are other Linux laptop makers out there. I'm looking at a Tech Radar article. There's System 76, so they're the ones that make Pop OS.
Yeah.
There's a German company who has been hyped by a guy that in Belgium who is French, who they advertise it on his YouTube channel. And he does a weekly Linux show on Linux News, which I like a lot. And if you give me a minute, I'll find him.
Sure.
Let's see. I'm looking at my my YouTube feed right now. Just looking to see if I can see something from him.
By the way, just for those of you who just joined, Lee is having a discussion about researching the potential purchase of a Linux laptop.
Yes, it's none of my work, and I'm falling on the idea of getting something with Linux pre-installed and where all the hardware is guaranteed to work. That's the point. All the hardware.
I have an XPS 13, Lee.
Yes, sir.
And it works reasonably well. In fact, I have two of them. And one of them that the battery blew up. You don't want to overcharge them.
Yeah.
The battery swells and it bulges the keyboard. And but you can have it repaired. I say from experience. And I haven't found any real problems with it, except that when I first got it, it came with a dongle that plugged into the USB-C port and gave you a couple of video ports and another let's see, a Ethernet, which it doesn't have an Ethernet port. If you can't make Wi-Fi work, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And unless you buy the dongle, which is not terribly expensive.
Wait, a dongle or a dock?
A dongle.
If you're talking about a Dell computer and USB-C and I've been looking for a dock for my HP Envy.
Well, I can tell you from experience that Dell docks are pretty unreliable.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah. It's better to get a third party.
And
Most
so
of those
it,
work.
and it,
Yeah, they're
it
designed to work
plugs
with
right
Dell.
right in, and we're seeing it seems to work reasonably well. I've tried it with a couple of displays. The big thing that I got it for was to get a Ethernet port, because I didn't want to be reliant on USB or on Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them nowadays are coming with a USB-C port.
Oh, yeah.
They're making these things small, but
Yeah.
generally Dell, especially the XPS series, is known to have been tested for Linux.
Well,
Just
say
go to the
when-
Dell website and take a look at that stuff. And these docks for Dell are all over on Amazon.
When I first got this, the dongle didn't work for one of the display ports it has, and it was a driver problem. And eventually they got it to work.
Yes,
But it took
there's
a-
lots of
It
discussion
wasn't
about
until a
that.
year after I got the laptop that the dongle finally worked fully.
Show and tell, here's what I got. The laptop that I call my APCUG one, because that's the one they gave me to do all the recordings and stuff, doesn't have Ethernet, only has Wi-Fi, and I like Ethernet. So what I did was I bought one of these. And this one is a USB, but the one on the other laptop is a C. And it has 3 USB 3s in. And then on the end, it's hard to see in that, there's an Ethernet connector. So I can run Ethernet off of this. And
Does that
plus,
have Linux drivers?
it's what I use. So it's just plug and play as far as I know. I take it with me when I go to our Linux group, so I can have extra plugs on the laptop. And I'm using, we refurbished a bunch of old small Dells that have the twirling monitor that can flip back over to make it look like a tablet.
Flip.
Yeah, something like a flip, but it just the top turns. And so I have this with it, so I plug it in. I can have an Ethernet port if I need it, and 3 extra USB 3s. Hi, Drew.
Hey, Drew,
How are you?
all right.
John, Andy, or Bill asked me last week what we talked, or last month we talked about. I told him, I said, well, we didn't talk enough Linux because some guy who came to talk Linux excused himself and left. So I'm not quite sure who that was, and I hope that they come back, they can ask Linux questions.
I'd like to know how to compile a program if anyone wants to teach that.
Oh, I haven't done that in so damn long. I can't even hardly remember what was done.
I know how to pile things on a program.
See, in
Well, I'm an
Do you have
program
a-
analyst, so.
Do you have a program, Drew? mean, you can
Well,
write a
not
hello
not one
world.
that I'm writing, but there are sometimes you go to a website and you can download binaries, and sometimes you can download source code.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's usually wrapped up in a gzip file, and you have to run a make file and a make this, and that's what I don't know how to do that I want to know how to do.
The only way I knew how to do it was
Sergey is
Yeah.
probably the guy who actively does that,
Right.
or Sujit DeMello, but they probably use VS Code or something, which runs on Linux. I mean, they may do that. So you don't do it at the command line, but I mean, I have been a programmer in my life compiling things on Unix. Bill, Chris, are you a programmer?
No, not trained as a programmer, although I have Drew, one of the things that I did many years ago, I think it was 2008, there's this thing called Linux from scratch.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can compile a whole,
And it takes you
kernel.
through the whole process. You know, step by step by step by step. You start with a Linux machine. Do you have a Linux machine, Drew, or not?
I do.
Okay, because you start with a Linux machine and you create a partition somewhere on your system, and you use that partition and you build Linux for that partition step by step by step. You start off by building tools on the host system, and then you get to the point where you're actually building stuff on the host for the guest. So.
Well,
Yeah, but if you just have downloaded a program that you want to compile.
Yeah, usually what happens, Drew, if you download a program that's a gzip, okay, and you unzip it, because usually if you download a gzip and you double click it, it will expand it and extract it for you, and once you do that, then you can do things like make and make install, right?
Yeah, that's only typically only if it's a C or a C++ program.
Yeah, right.
If it's any other language, just this instructions are slightly different.
Okay.
The other kind of I would say popular languages you might come across now is Golang or .NET or Java or Python, right? Those are the kind of 4 popular languages these days. Each one of them, unfortunately, has their own ways for compiling. But typically, if it's a popular repository, like a GitHub repository or a source code repository, there'll be instructions. You know, there's always a page, there's always a link for compiling on the README, like, you know, the default README page, and you just have to kind of follow those instructions. Hopefully, you have the tools that you need. Sometimes you'll have to pre-install Golang, and in Linux that's really easy, right? It's just whatever you do apt-get Golang or something like that. So the instructions are so that it shouldn't take too long to get you going in terms of the tools that you need. Once you do the tools, then you kind of just run the build, and that can take a few seconds or sometimes a few minutes.
So now, is one of the problems that the environment may need to have things like the load library path set or the load library path?
Sometimes.
Because otherwise you just have to do a GCC probe.c.
Typically now they use the make files to try to get around all of that and to automate, most of that, so you don't have to know the exact GCC, syntax or commands that you need to do. And you're right. I've seen cases with C++ programs where you have to install some apt-get some libraries before you can install before you can run the build, right? So the build will depend on some lib files. And those lib files you'll get via an apt-get or a yum command to kind of install them on your computer before you can run the build.
So for somebody like Drew, it would be different libraries depending on what the program is that you're installing or trying to build, and it should tell you if you're getting it from Git or someplace like that. It should tell you what libraries you need.
Yeah.
And where you put those is a standard place if you do a get, an apt-get app, right?
Well, the person who wrote this program made the make file for it. And the make file typically contains a lot of these dependencies and libraries and stuff you need. So once you get the thing unpacked into a directory somewhere, just type make and sit back and watch the fun. And, a lot of that's already coded in there because the person who wrote the program wrote the make file. It won't always work, but it's a good step forward.
Now that we've given Drew a bunch of background information, Drew, what is it you're trying to do now? Have we helped with this discussion?
Well, I downloaded a copy of software for cloning hard drives. It was called RescueZilla.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay.
they offer it in a binary, and they offer it the ability to download the code and create the ISO file.
Right.
Or I'm assuming that it creates an ISO. I don't know what it creates. But I ran a make on the I downloaded the code, and I did a make. Oops, sorry about that. We're about to have a thunderstorm here in Sarasota. I downloaded the file and I ran make, and it did run a bunch of things, and they were pretty much all errors.
Okay.
Okay, that's where you start.
And, it was complaining about some variables that were not set and some
Mhm.
environment settings that were not right, and it just left me in a hole.
Some of that's an environmental setting that you may have to set up, and like John was saying, whoever created the package and made the make file probably also has some kind of a text file that will tell you how to set up your environmentals, so that when you run the make, you can find some of the stuff via the environmentals.
Right. In this repository, was there a README file of some sort, Drew?
Nothing that was helpful to me.
Doug?
That's another aspect of what we do, maybe in these workshops,
Yeah.
that when one person reads that description, they may not understand the words the same
Right.
way that somebody else does.
Right.
So we could take a look at that
Yeah.
description and,
Yep. So Drew,
and see what it means.
yeah,
That's
Drew,
just learning how to read something is important.
yep.
Mhm.
Drew, what I can do is make you a co-host, and you can present maybe and take us to the repository location and share your screen. Is that helpful?
Well, you're kind of putting me on the spot right now to get there.
No, hey, Drew, that's what we do, you know?
Yeah,
Don't worry about it.
Well, I'd recommend he starts off with his
right now, I
decide
don't-
what language
Right
to
now, I'd have to
use.
fire up my, right now I'm on my Windows computer. I'd have
Oh,
to.
all right, okay, all right.
Do it next month. That would
Or
work.
next month, yeah.
I'd
do
recommend
next
you
month.
pick the language you want to use first and start off with the Hello World program. Write that, compile that before you go into anything complicated. That'll get you through the steps of ensuring that the compile steps work okay.
Now, I have a
Once you've got that in place, we'll then go for the complicated stuff.
I have a suggestion too, in case you want to avoid the pain of learning how to compile the program, is that there's modern alternatives for getting software that will work on any distro, or supposedly, is to try and find the program that's been created as a flat pack or a snap or an app image. All those are three different ways that developers can use to make a package that the user can download and install it, and then it's there. You know, you don't have to get it from a particular distro repository. You can just download it from where you can find it as from a trusted source, I should say, too. You don't want to download it from Joe Blow's website,
FlatHub.
mine, but you may be able to find it as a flat pack, which is sort of an unaligned repository system that some distro makers like Linux Mint use, or you can get it as a snap, which is something that Ubuntu has pioneered and controlled, or you can use try and find an app image repository and get it from there. And some Linux distro makers have integrated at least one particular of these methods into their system, so that they include that in their software repository store. You know, so
Hmm.
that would be a more modern way of getting the software. And unless you want to learn how to package something and do it yourself, you can avoid all that.
Yep. So Drew, what Linux distribution are you using?
Linux Mint.
Okay, all right.
Would you post a request, like post something in the groups.io to describe what it is you want to do so that the rest of us might get some preparation for the next meeting?
Yep.
Oh, sure.
Yep.
By the way, lately I have been using ChatGPT
Yeah.
and asking it questions of how do I do this? And it comes back, and just the same way that Sujit has used Copilot in VS Code, he's paying for that, but you can just ask ChatGPT or something in Bing, how do I compile this on this version of Linux, right?
Yeah. It's a potential because ChatGPT and some of the others in that may give you the foundation of a code for a program with your specifications, but odds are it's not going to work because 80% of the code may be okay. It's the 20% that you're going to have to doctor.
Yeah, well, the thing is that you can ask it, how do I compile this program? Or how do I use make for a program such as this? Not give me the code for the program.
Correct.
Although I asked it how to set up a query of a database, and then I asked it, how do I tell you what the database looks like? It was pretty good. And then it goes at the end and it explains what it just told you. So, there's somebody else that you can ask. And this is why why these AI bots are taking over for just a plain web search, because they give you one answer instead of 4 million.
We won't even need this workshop anymore.
Oh, sure.
Oh,
We gotta
That's
have
also-
the interaction. Come on.
That's also assuming you can trust what ChatGPT tells you.
Correct.
well, you can't, but
I wouldn't trust it with anything that's important.
it gives you something to try.
Yeah.
And
Right.
you can
it-
ask
it-
the
it
same
gives-
question multiple times.
You use it as a foundation.
Yeah.
I always compare ChatGPT to Bard and Bing and sort of get ChatGPT seems to be the primary one that I use, but it gives me ideas. I did ask it how to compile a program, and it did give me some basic instructions. And I've used it to assist me in doing Linux things before. And I said, how do I get VNC to launch automatically when the computer boots? And it wrote the code for me, and it did it.
But now a lot of times you'll find kind of like bugs or incorrect forming of lines of code or commands within the line of code. You're going to have to go in, figure out what the problem is, correct it, and after a little bit of work, you'll end up with a usable program.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that chat is a way to get ideas and get started and to help you, but not to provide you necessarily with the 100% answer.
Yeah, so it's a brainstorming tool.
I've
Yeah,
used it
it-
this, when learning new languages, I've used it to ask me how to write some simple programs, so it gives me a foundation. So I don't have to stumble around quite as much as I would have to if I was having to do it from all memory, book memory and all that stuff.
That's right.
I forgot my old Pascal that I learned in college, and I asked ChatGPT the other day, write some Pascal code to print out the numbers 1 to 10 on separate lines, and it did it. And it came out with a little loop, and it did it.
One of the things with ChatGPT, if you want to compare which one to use, what's important is that ChatGPT is trained with data that goes back to 2021. So any result you get from ChatGPT, will be dated to 2021.
Wait, Sujit, isn't it that it only has data up to 2021?
Correct.
Yes.
Not past that. Yeah.
Right.
No, yeah, you're right. Up to 2021 is dated. So you're right. That's a good clarification. The data will be as old as, well, I'm not sure I'm saying this correctly, but 2021 and older is what information you're going to get. Okay. If you want a more updated experience, then the Bing, at least from the Microsoft side, the Bing integration with ChatGPT, that gives you a much more recent data set, because what it does is it uses what ChatGPT has done, and it aggregates it with what Bing has also scoured on the internet most recently, and combines it to create a more updated information set for you. So that's what now ChatGPT 4.0, I believe, has been updated to, I believe, maybe late 2021, maybe early 2022. So that's a little more updated. I'm not sure which version of ChatGPT you're using, but the Bing one is essentially always aggregating it with the most recent results, as if you were to do a Google or Bing search. So it would take all of that plus all the good stuff that ChatGPT has before, and it will combine the two and create an aggregated result for you.
So since you are in fact active in programming, and you're brought up this question of stuff that's newer, has there been much of a change? Like, if I sat down and use GCC, wouldn't I be able to compile things on Linux the same as I did 30 years ago?
Most, yeah, for Linux, Unix kind of stuff, I think you're right, absolutely right. It probably hasn't, anything that's recent is not going to make much difference. But when you're in the kind of work that I'm in with software engineering, and you're doing it with all the cloud technologies, those things change every day. And so for us to rely on ChatGPT, we'll get some old way of doing something which probably doesn't work anymore, or is obsolete of some sort. Whereas we need a little more updated information or more recent. Often we're writing programs, as I said, with Golang or .NET or Java, and we don't want to have it give us an answer using some old version of Java, for example, that is may not work today. But you're correct for what this group is doing over here. With just Unix and Linux, yeah. I mean, now if you ask ChatGPT what's the best Linux laptop out there, it'll probably give you one from 2021. And it may not be the most recent one. If that's fine for you, that's fine for you. But if you want a better answer, maybe you have to use Bing ChatGPT.
Very good. See, this is pretty good. We've gone a half hour now, and just based on people speaking up and talking about something, we've managed to keep it interesting. That's good. As I said before the top of the hour, I talked with Sergey earlier, and he was preparing some different topics. And I said, well, one thing you could do, Sergey, is give people an introduction to the things you're preparing. And he said, okay, I'll do that. And then a couple of days ago, he got a hold of me and said, I'm sorry, Bill, something came up. I can't come to the meeting. So we're left with those of us who pipe up and talk about something. And I also have a couple distributions I want to talk about. So we can do anything at this point. Anybody have any other topics they want to talk about?
I have a quick question that's sort of a blood and guts question, and
Yeah.
I'm not looking for an answer online, but if somebody could email me with some clues. And this is very simple, but I'm trying to move the function of one key on my keyboard to a different key on the keyboard. In other words, I know the key codes and everything, and I think there's a program called XModMap that should be able to do this, but I can't seem to get the thing to run and do what I want. And so if anybody has a clue as to how to move, take one key and make another key do what the other key used to do in some simple way, email me with the answer, because I've been working this for a week, or not steadily, but I've been poking at it for a week or so, and I'm not getting anywhere. So that's my blood and guts question for the day.
In Linux, of course, right?
Yeah, yes, of course, yes.
Okay.
I'm running Manjaro, if that matters, and XFCE4 as the desktop.
Interesting.
Bruce, is that anything like way back when in the DOS days, Windows 5.1 or WordPerfect 5.1? They just gave you different colored keys for the keyboard. You just pop off a little screwdriver.
That's right.
You got either red or blue, right? So if you find a small screwdriver, you can probably pop whatever key that you want and swap them like that.
But it's the position on the keyboard that I want to change, so I would need a hacksaw to do that, and I'm not sure it'll work quite that well.
Okay, no, that's newer technology now.
Okay.
I don't know. It's just one of those little things. I thought this should be straightforward, and I can get a key to invoke a shell program. That's pretty easy.
Yeah,
but-
it is. Yeah, you want to remap your keys, and I'm not really certain how to do that.
All right. Well, that's something for you to chew on a little bit if you want something to think about. I'm having trouble getting it to work. So anyway, that's enough for that, because I don't think we're going to come up with an answer on the fly. But
on a serious note, Bruce, the one thing that I ran into way back when trying to remap various keys was if I did anything else, invariably I ran into a conflict someplace along the line. Just something to be aware of.
well, okay. I mean, I can always set it back to the way it used to be, so I'm not too worried about that sort of thing. But
What Linux we're using?
Manjaro, XFCE.
yeah, the XFCE desktop and Manjaro.
It was MAN.
Manjaro. Is it version 22 or an older one?
It's all updated to the latest thing, so it's a rolling release. So I have no
Okay.
idea what they're calling this.
It's probably 22 now.
It's probably 22. Yeah. I blindly do updates and then hope for the best.
I just asked ChatGPT how to do it.
And what does the great oracle of Google say?
Are you trying to drag me into the 21st century here somehow, or the 20th? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh,
Check the comments, Bruce.
yeah. Look at the comment, the chat.
yeah.
Lee popped something in there.
All right, I'll give that a try. What the heck?
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea if it works, but it's there.
I have to join the new world at some point.
I also asked ChatGPT what's the best Linux laptop.
What did it say?
It tried to punt. It says there is no one best Linux laptop, depending on the specific. So it did give 4 laptops though. Dell XPS 13 Developer Edition, System 76, Galgo Pro,
Lenovo?
Lenovo, that's it, right. ThinkPad X1 Carbon and Asus ZenBook UX425.
You know, one thing you can do is go to your local laptop store and you say, look, you want me to spend a big chunk of money on this laptop sitting here, you let me run Linux on it for a minute and see if it works or not. They can be very accommodating where money's involved.
Well, I'm sure.
So you're saying that XModMap is giving you trouble?
Well, it's not giving me trouble. It doesn't seem to accomplish what I want, and I'm not sure it's being executed. I put it in my .xinitrc file, and there's a place in there where it seems to be wanting to invoke, user add-ons, and maybe I'm doing it too late in the whole start process for X. I don't know. I'm just poking around at this and I'm running into problems. So I just thought I'd throw it out there for you gurus to take a quick look at and see if you come up with some steps that I should take to make it work.
By the way, Sujit threw some stuff in the chat from an answer he got from Bing AI. So
Okay, I'll check that out.
yeah.
And to edify all of us, would you post this in the linuxgroups.io?
Yeah, if I had an answer, I would, but right now it's only a question.
No, post the question,
Okay.
because there's more people than just the ones sitting here.
Right. Yeah.
I'm
And,
afraid I'll
and
get
then
a
we'd
bunch,
all know the answer too.
All right.
I'm afraid I'll get a whole bunch of cartoons there of people saying, I'm with stupid, you know?
Hasn't happened.
No,
Bruce,
the,
Bruce,
was it- yeah.
Manjaro, besides the Xmod map in the software store, they also have Xkey caps, which is a graphical front end for Xmod map.
Oh, okay.
Might help you.
Maybe that would make it easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would,
I'll
I was
try.
just, yeah, just on general programming I've been exposed to. I would expect too late not to be a problem, but maybe too early is.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. When does the .xrc .xinit get run? It's got to be early in the process, no? When it's first starting up.
Yes.
It's supposed to.
Is that where it's, you know, if it runs before XRC.
Most people just do it for themselves when they log in.
Yeah, well,
You
that's
wouldn't want to change the keyboard so that anybody who walks up to it would be confused.
No, this mod goes in your home directory and supposedly only affects you
Ah, okay.
as the login person. I'll keep pecking away at it. I'll figure it out one of these days, but maybe not too soon. There's too much going on. But you know, if I come up with useful.
Yeah, try it from an X window once the X Windows is up. And just open up an X term and run it there and see if it works.
So it should work sort of in real time, if you will, and right out of a terminal.
Yeah, I would expect that. If it can go in and hit the real, there's a map somewhere it has, and these maps often are dynamic. This type of map's often dynamic. Not that it always is, you mind you, but they can be dynamic and happen in real time.
Yeah, I read somewhere that when you want to restart Xmod RC, you should do or Xmod. Getting tangled up with the words here. When you want to restart it, you should do a kill on it with the -hup, and it'll restart. Anyway, there's a lot going on here, and it's down at a level of getting things moving at the very beginning of booting up that I don't really mess with all that much. So it's a learning experience. But I'll try some of these things. I'll read the chat and I'll follow some of your suggestions, and we'll see where it goes. I love this group. Yeah, a lot of fun. So, okay, I don't want to take any more time with that.
No. Hey, this is what we do. You know that.
If you got some fun distros to display, though, I'd like to hear about that too.
Well,
So,
let me say a couple words as an intro to that. I ran across an article recently that talked about this distribution called BlendOS. Let me start sharing my screen here. Let's see here. Let's do the whole screen. Share. Okay, now let's do that. Let's go up here and go to BlendOS. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, let me just go back to the basics first. Forget about this statement about containers. All right. So if we go here to, oh, wait a minute, let me, dude, there it goes. So anyway, this BlendOS distribution bills itself as a distribution blend of Linux distributions, Android apps, and web apps, right? And it sounded kind of interesting. It supports both GNOME and KDE. And they talk about it being immutable. So you can't mess up the operating system. And you can use the apps from Arch, Fedora, Ubuntu, right? And you can use a package manager directly. And here's the kicker: access installed apps in containers from the base OS. So basically, you're using a bunch of containers to do whatever it is you want to do. And I said, well, what is this thing? So what I did was I installed it in a virtual box. Let me start it up, see what we got here. Let me just get rid of this for a minute. And I can minimize this. I don't need this guy. This. Come on. All right. Cool. So I installed it, and yes, I'm still running my virtual machines from a spinning hard drive, so it's slow. I think one of my projects over the next month or two, I've got my now 10-year-old Linux or Dell desktop that has a solid-state drive in it, and I'm going to convert that to all Linux, so that in the future when I play these games, I can do it a little bit faster because it'll have a 1 gig solid-state drive in it. But anyway, I chose the KDE desktop for this thing. And the other thing I did in researching this, I stumbled across a conversation thread in the Endeavor OS area. And people were saying, not necessarily ready for prime time here. Because, if you look at the menu of items, especially in the system area, I don't see anything that talks about how to do things. Now, if we bring up a console here, they do talk about the fact that there is a program called Blend. So if we do a man page on Blend, yeah, right. Thank you. See, everything I saw said, well, you can use the blend command, and that will then, let me just do blend by itself to create. See, it says, okay, use BlendOS settings app. All right, so where is BlendOS settings? Let's see. BLEND.
There it is, right there.
All right, let's see. See what it says. Blend settings. Aha, here we go. Okay. So just moving this down here to create and manage Linux containers. So installed apps will appear as application launchers. So if we, here you go. So if I want to install something from Ubuntu, for example, and I want to call this Ubuntu NTU 22. Okay, and let's see here. For example, apt, let's see, executed. For example, apt Ubuntu app in a container named Ubuntu. Let's see here. Let me press this add button. Creating container, okay. Trying to pull Docker. Warning, See,
Does each OS get its own container, or does each app get its own container?
the way it reads, it sounds like each of these apps, excuse me, each of these distributions gets its own container. Let's see what we got here. Opening the blob, we got blobs. NVIDIA drivers support starting blend. Really curious to see what's going on here. So it says creating a container. Okay. But the other, some other discussions that I ran across talk about the fact that when you're doing things in containers and blend, things take an awful long time.
If you were just to invoke a program like VI and you
Mhm.
invoke it with vi.ubuntu, the way it's said there, would it create the container and start that program in there? That's what it said in the description.
Good
You're
question.
You're talking about this description here?
Yeah, containers. It says, for example,
Right. For example, apt in a container.
so you start apt and it
Yeah.
starts,
In a container named Ubuntu.
binaries can be executed with the container's name as a suffix.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes. If the container exists. Right?
Oh, well, it didn't say that.
You can associate a binary to container, so we use it without a suffix. You know, the other thing is that this, wait, what's going on here? So we got Ubuntu. All right, so it sounds like I have an Ubuntu 22 container. All right. It's there. Now, what's this?
Does the OS have a way of listing existing containers?
I don't know the answer to that question. Let's see here. Let's go back here. Let's go back
You
here.
try going up to the command line and just do a search for Ubuntu 22.
Ooh, let me see something. So, apt. What was it? Arrow.
Doesn't Docker have a container directory to keep its containers in?
Let's see. What do I got here? Let me see what's. Stop documents, locale, music, pictures. This looks like the standard home directory.
You can always try to locate. The locate command can be pretty handy too for finding stuff.
Yeah, but locate, you have to have it in the database. If it was just created, it's probably not in the locate.db file.
Oh, I see. Yeah, they don't have it in here.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and you're in as a regular user now, right, Bill? You're not in as a sudo, right?
No, correct. Yeah.
So why don't you try going back out to the start at the root as sudo and just do a, I don't know, you command line wizards are going to know what it should be, to do a search for Ubuntu 22.
Let me see what we got here. We're up at the root of the file system here.
Yeah, but you want to do it recursively.
Yeah. I must admit, I am lost at this point. See, this is why I said to myself, I don't know that I want to play a whole lot with this at this point. Because it's you can install and submit web apps from the web store. Yeah, see if I go to the web store. Web store.
Which, Jesus.
Yeah. Come on. Let me see this. Let's see. Install this app. Really?
That took a while.
Yeah. All right. So does that mean I now have Google? Let me see.
Go to internet.
It's a, oh, this is the Google utility. It's not. No, thanks. I don't want to sign in.
Well, it looks like a web browser.
It looks like, yeah, but app, quit, back, reload. Trending searches.
Hello, Judy.
Student one.
Bill's doing a presentation on BlendOS.
Judy is Fred. Haven't had
Oh,
a
yeah, that's
chance to
right.
change-
Judy's Fred. Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to change my name.
Oh,
That's
okay.
okay. You don't need to change your name.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm changing my name just for you Linux guys.
All right, that's fine.
So you're Judy in the Windows section?
In GitHub, there is an entry for BlendOS-blend and a README,
Okay.
which is not real helpful, except that it says that Blend is a tool to manage overlays, containers, and multiple distributions. The repository also contains Blend settings for configuring Blend and overlays and other utilities. And there's
Okay.
there's a thing called overlay FS tools, and also where was it? init-blend file. The init-blend file is this repository.
Oh. Where would one find that init file? I wonder.
Well, I would use where is blend, and that would give you an idea of something.
All right, let's see what we say. User bin blend.
And if you do blend -- help, you just tried executing blend, but blend -- help.
Well, I think it said -H was the help. Use wait a minute. Shows this help message. So that's the only help message you got.
It's a terse message. That's the problem.
It's a very terse message. It's like, guys, so you used to create and manage containers, and then you can install and submit web apps from the web store. It's not very
Illuminating.
it's not very obvious what's going on here. So
Yeah, I
Pretty
found
well
the-
put us all off on this.
say
I found
again,
a command to list all containers from Docker.
what is it?
It's you run it under sudo Docker container ls.
Sudo Docker container.
Container
Yep.
ls.
LS. Okay, let's see what happens. Docker not found. Ha! Yeah, right.
Okay. So
Okay. See,
they might have redirected Docker to its own container list.
yeah, well, that's why when I started playing with this, I said, it's a nice concept, but I don't know that it's something worth talking about too much.
Yeah, anyway.
All right. So that's why I also downloaded OpenMandriva, which I can take a look at. So my suggestion right now is I'm going to shut this guy down. And let's go on to something a little more reasonable, which is OpenMandriva. Let me get rid of this. There we go. Just focus, do that.
I thought I had some containers on my system, I guess I don't. Oh.
Oh, set up professional audio and audio settings. One of the interesting thing about OpenMandriva is when I installed it, it installed all of the things that normally come in the add-ons, okay? So that it automatically gave me the opportunity to do a view, and come down here to virtual screen, and all these resize options were already populated, which is a very nice thing. Okay. So, and the other thing is if you go to the and type in software, you find out that their software store is called Discover.
Discover.
And if you look for down here, it's taught, it automatically looks at whether it needs to fetch updates or not. But some interesting things I saw here were it tells you whether they're flat packs or what. And you'll notice there are a fair number of flat packs in here, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, if I remember correctly, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if the concept of containers is something this group understands, because that's very important to comprehend. I can appreciate what BlendOS is doing, and maybe even OpenMandriva as well.
Yeah.
In that they're leveraging the power of Linux containers to allow you to run any apps from a Linux app store, for example,
Right.
onto your desktop, right?
Okay.
So I guess open question: does everyone know what what the container? It sounds like some of us do know it, but is the concept of containers well understood here? The Linux containers.
I cannot say I well understand it.
Yeah.
No.
I've stumbled around it, but haven't got everything to work I want yet.
I've tried to put a container up in WSL Ubuntu and never got anywhere. So I'd love to have some help with that sometime.
I'd like a container for something like Bitbucket or something, so I can run my own repository that can be picked up and moved somewhere else if I wanted to.
Oh.
Yeah, so so the way I think about containers, it's like a lightweight VM, right? So what Chris is showing, Bill's showing you is running multiple VMs, right? But sometimes you want the same VM and you want to do different things inside of that VM. And that's what Linux containers let you do. They let you do they're like mini VMs inside of the VM. Okay.
Okay,
You could run like, and that's the kind of advantage to this is if you want to run software from an app store. You gave an example. I think you showed one, Bill, about I think you had a Google app or something like that
Right,
running
yeah,
on
yeah.
Blend.
Yep.
And the reason that works is that it installed this container that somebody had developed for hand and put it up on the App Store, and it just downloads the container to your machine, the container image, and then runs that container, and that runs as a mini VM inside of your Linux or operating system.
Oh,
right?
okay, all right.
And it's completely segmented from anything else, so it can't touch your server, and nobody in the server can touch it. It just runs as an isolated process on your machine, but it cannot access your files unless you specifically give it permission. So there's an inherent security in there, which is why, if they can't, the possibility of having a rogue app, for example, is not there, right? Because the app can't do anything on your machine other than maybe run a browser or do whatever the app is supposed to do.
Yeah, it's kind of, I envision it as kind of a super change route, where in the container is all the files that can be run, and then when the container started, there's a super duper change route that also redirects internet ports and a few other things to the container. So
correct, and that too only if you allow it, right? So that's again, it's within your control to say, okay, this container or this app, I permit it to access the internet, right? So then that's allowed,
yes.
or I can connect connections into that container. Like maybe the container is running a web server, for example, and you need to access that web server.
Yeah, another big one, another big use is if you got like 100 servers you want to run, or you want to run the same application in all 100 servers. You make a container, put it on all 100 servers and start it, and it'll behave the same.
That's correct. And that's the exact same concept they've used in the App Store, right? If you think about it, the App Store is doing the same thing. It's there's millions of people downloading that same app and running it on their machines. And you don't have to know, like just to talk about some of the struggles that Drew was having, right? Which files do I need? What config do I need? Which libraries do I need? Nothing, right? You install the container and you run it. Everything you need to run that app is in the container, right? Guaranteed.
Yeah, it's not running as a virtual machine, as I understand it. It's running native, but it's just all locked up in another way. It's
Correct.
using system calls to redirect the system calls and other things, so you control what's going on.
Yeah, I think somebody was trying to get a word in. Yeah.
Are you talking this? You're talking about essentially Docker, right? As one of
so I was about to go there. So it's interesting. So Docker, so Linux containers has been there since the birth of Linux. Okay. If you go back to very early versions of Linux, they had containers in there. But the problem with Linux containers is that they were very arcane and difficult to use. What Docker did is they made Linux containers easy to use. That's the only thing they did, right? They made it really easy to use Linux containers. And that is why they became popular. But under the covers, it's using a Linux container. It's just that, you would have had to learn a whole bunch of commands and C++ programs and install blah, 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 just to use the container. And they kind of create this entire framework around Linux containers, and they called it Docker.
It's the consumer version. And then my understanding of the difference between containers or Docker, and you're referring to a mini VM, is that the containers or the Docker containers, whether they're Docker or not, the container concept is that it contains an application, but it doesn't have to contain the superstructure of the operating system. So you can have, you don't have to essentially replicate your operating environment for every container. So every container is considerably smaller than a similar VM.
Correct. It uses all of the files in the container for running it, for hosting the program. But yes, you don't have to recreate. You don't have to repackage all of that unless your container, your application wishes to override one of those files, maybe it wants to do something different than what your operating system has, in which case you can include that in your container.
Another interesting thing.
Sujit, could you explain what you meant by containers were there from the beginning? Where were they?
In the Linux operating system. So Linux always had this system called containers, right? The feature of containers has always been there. It's not something that is being.
There's a system called containers.
It's a feature in Linux. It's called containers. Containers is a Linux thing, right?
Is it
It's been
related?
there.
Is there a manual page for this in?
Yeah, if you look
section
for
8
LCX, if you look at the command LCX.
LCX.
Is this related to like process groups and that whole concept?
I think that may be part of it, Bruce. You
Okay.
know, be trying to make sure that all of that information is in one container, like, you know, whatever that all the security, everything is all kind of locked down in that container.
Right.
So that was, and the fact that, you know, that container runs in this sandbox, right, on your machine, is the other part of what the Linux containers gives you.
Okay, I never heard them called containers before, but I'll have to look into that.
Did I miss here? Is it LXC?
I think it's LXC. Sorry, I missaid it.
Well, yeah, that was a system call that's newer than my time. Maybe newer than a lot of our times.
It's been around for a while, like ever since you know, early days of Linux, I think. And like I said, you know, all Docker did was made it democratize it, right? It made it easy to use. That's all it did.
Of course, my early days at Linux goes back to 1990s.
It's pretty early.
I don't remember LXC.
I don't know if any of you have tried it, but I actually installed the very first version of Linux by hand. I think it was in the 90s. I printed out the instructions. They were like in a folder that thick, and installed it by hand, like, you know, FTPing a file at a time from the internet or from the dial-up at the time. To get it running. I don't remember if I was successful, but I did try it.
I was a coward. I took what was that one that started with S? I remember it started with S.
You know, the problem with many Linux commands is that they're so cryptic that nobody can ever find them. This may be one of those.
Yeah.
They're difficult to use. Like, you know, even if you find the command, it's so difficult to use that nobody could figure it out unless, you know, you're a Sergey kind of person. You wouldn't know. And so that's what Docker did. It just made it so that, you know, people like you and me can figure this stuff out easy.
Well,
I remember when I first used Sun OS.
I just put a link to the manual page for LXC container.conf in the chat. So you'll all be able to get that and start. I mean, that's a new addition that I was completely unaware of. So, you know, I love these workshops. I learn something, at least one thing every time.
Yep.
But now, Kubernetes, am I saying it right? That replaced Docker.
So it's a good question, John. And at least the way I say it is Kubernetes, but Kubernetes is fine as well. But so the problem with Docker, right? Like Docker made containers, Linux containers, easy to use. Okay, so everyone's got crazy and started, you know, using Docker containers for everything, right? Especially in the software world, everything is a Docker container these days. But then Docker containers got difficult to manage, right? Because now they have, you know, you had in your company, you would have like hundreds of these Docker containers all over. Nobody knew, you know, where they were running, what they were doing. You know, there was no way to keep an eye on them easily. And that's what Kubernetes did. It's essentially a Docker container orchestrator, right? It orchestrates these containers and manages them. So Kubernetes sits on top of containers to make sense of, so that if you have like 100 containers, it can kind of orchestrate them for you. So it'll say, okay, these 50 containers are running that app, and those 50 containers are running that other app, and they're all related to each other, and they talk to each other and whatnot. And so that's what. So it's an evolutionary process. You're right in catching that. Kubernetes just builds on top of Docker containers.
So does that imply to us that BlendOS should have some Kubernetes orchestrator? That is the way we find all of those containers that they're talking about?
You could, if you have, so it's a good question. So if you feel the need to manage multiple sets of containers, let's say, for example, they were, I think it was Bill was installing that Chrome browser or something like that, or like a Google app. So that was a container running on his machine. Now, if he needed to have 10 of those container of those apps, instances of those apps running on his machine, for whatever reason, I don't know, I'm just making it up. But if he had that need to say, I need to run 10 of these apps and I need to make sure that they're always running and, shut them down when I want to, or bring them up when I want to, then that's a need. That's a time when you say, okay, maybe I need to put these containers inside of a Kubernetes cluster so that Kubernetes can manage them for me. It's unlikely, though, in that use case that I just described, that he would need to do that. But if you had other containers, the most popular ones are if you have a container for, let's say, some sort of Java program, that is serving up some information for your company, for example. And you may want to have 10 of them running, right, to make sure that there's enough to go around for everyone using it. That's when you would put them in Kubernetes. So Kubernetes would then make sure that there's 10 containers running all the time. If one of the containers dies, Kubernetes will start another one for you, making sure there's always 10 there. If you need to increase it to 15, you can just tell Kubernetes, I need 15, and it will just spin up another 5. So all of those, that level of management when you need it with all of these containers is when you move to something like Kubernetes.
Yeah, and don't forget, you can have like your Java application, one container, in your database and another container, shared by several other containers.
Correct.
And so
that's absolutely correct.
And so what happens, you can also probably dynamically change it, have the system, Kubernetes dynamically change it. I would expect it to dynamically change it to increase or decrease.
Yep. So you could tell Kubernetes, like, I need 10 of the web server and 5 of the database containers running all the time. And by the way, the 2 of them talk to each other, so they kind of connected in Kubernetes, and so they the network is connected. And then you say, hey, my website's very popular. I want to increase the database to 15 to 10, maybe, so from 5 to 10. So all of those are easy to do when you have Kubernetes. If you were to do Docker commands for all of those, or God forbid, Linux container commands, then that would be much more difficult to do by hand. And that's what Kubernetes is, just an orchestrator that makes it easy to do that.
Yeah, another interesting thing with Docker is that if the container crashes or you stop it, and when you restart it again, it's the same as it goes back to this original reset state. So no matter what happens inside the container, unless you set it up to be permanent, it will the container itself is resets back to 0. So if something goes wrong with the software, you've got a clean start. Only your external permanent storage is at risk.
I'm going back to looking at BlendOS and how we didn't find it convenient for us.
Yes.
Because we didn't know what we were working with in a way.
That's true. Yes.
Now, is there a command that gets at Kubernetes? Like, how do I find out in BlendOS if Kubernetes is running? Is it a process? Can I do a PS? Can I do a top and see all these processes?
Yeah, so I think in Linux, if you run Kubernetes, I think it just, what is the command at Kubernetes in Linux? I'm trying to remember now. I'll have to look in my Kubernetes cluster. I don't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, there is obviously something called an operator. That's the term that they use in Kubernetes. Like it's called the operator. So there's an operator process that is kind of accepting your commands. And Kubernetes has a whole different command line. It's called kubectl. KUBECTL is the command line you use. So everything that you do in Kubernetes is kubectl. So if you can type kubectl on your machine, and you can and you may have Kubernetes there, or you may be talking to a Kubernetes cluster somewhere else in the cloud, most likely in the cloud.
So if Bill went back to BlendOS and we typed in KUBECTL and help, we'd find out whether there's something there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, BlendOS appears to me to be an end user operating system, like something that we would use on our laptops. Most likely, you don't want to put Kubernetes on that, right? Because you put Kubernetes on a machine, it's going to suck up like a lot of resources, right? It's going to run those operators like I talked about. It's going to be starting up containers because it needs to keep certain things running. Kubernetes itself runs inside of containers, so there's containers that it'll spin up to run some of its own software. So there's going to be a lot of overhead if you run Kubernetes on something like BlendOS. So I'm sure it's possible. I don't know if it's.
My question was, is BlendOS in fact running
Unlikely.
Kubernetes?
No,
because it says that it's going to put each of your commands in a container. It's
running native native Linux containers, BlendOS.
So now not Kubernetes.
No, it's
not
LXC.
Docker,
LXC.
LXC.
So each app in BlendOS is an LXC container.
Oh, okay.
What might be the benefit of doing that? I mean,
the benefit is that it allows me, like, so if let's say I were to, sorry, finish here. You wanted to say something? Finish your thought, John.
Well, that was it. I mean, I see. We didn't seem to see a benefit to BlendOS.
So I'll tell you at least. So the BlendOS there's nothing special about it in my mind. It's just that I think it's like a combination of Arch Linux and Fedora and whatnot. It's like a blend of 3 different distros, right? That's why they call it BlendOS. So it supports by being a blend of these. It supports the maximum number of app stores, right? You have apt-get, and you have different places where you can get software, and that's just the command line software. Now we're talking about user interface software, right? Things like browsers, X Windows, whatever, those kind of apps, VS Code, as you talked about earlier. If you want to install VS Code on your machine, it'll be nice to just say, LXC, whatever, install VS Code, something like that. I don't know. I'm just making it up here. But it'll be nice to be able to do that and I would trust that because I know that the software is running in a sandbox on my machine. I know that software cannot touch anything on my machine. One of the problems is just downloading stuff from the internet and running it is that you're not sure what it is doing to your machine, right? There's that level of distrust. But running it in the container gives you a better feeling because it's sandboxed in the container. It can't touch any of your files unless you have specifically allowed it to. And so it's easy to just run it and say, oh, this looks cool. Okay, great. I want it, or I don't want it, and delete it, and it's gone, right? And when you delete it, there's no traces left over. It's one file. The container file is deleted from your machine. There's no leftover libs or DLLs or whatnot. It's gone, right?
In the way back when, we were a mainframe environment, 3270 green screens for IMS email on a big blue mainframe. And they went over they were deploying PCs, in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And I'll mention the OS that they went with, that you can all have a good laugh. We went with OS 2.
Yep.
Yep.
And
okay.
what replaced our mainframe mail system was Lotus Notes. And they were running, when everything got up and running, they had hundreds. I don't know if they hit the 1,000 mark, but they had hundreds of Lotus Notes servers because they could only run like 4 instances on each server with it fully configured. And that was my first exposure to this containerized, I don't exactly remember the technology. I think they were on VMware overwhelmingly, but the idea of virtualization and containers. And I started out of curiosity, asking a bunch of questions about what was going on. One of the guys was a first aider, first aid squad, and he said, you know, it's like first aid. You have to answer the question, why? Why are you doing this? He said, it's all well and good to learn all about this, about the technology, but if you're not going to use it, you know, you're not going to set up a server for yourself so you can have 4 virtual servers within that to run 16 different copies of an application. He said, for you, and again, you could run Windows apps even under OS 2. He said, look at portable apps. So if you go to Linux or Pendrive Linux or portable apps, whatever, you can download applications that run completely in their own environment. So somewhere between downloading an editor that runs as its own self-executing exe file on Windows, where if you don't want to use it anymore, you delete a folder and it's gone, and Kubernetes, where you have a complete environment with many dozens, multiple hundreds, whatever, thousands of individual containers, or setting up a VMware environment where you can have, I saw Bill Chris's machine there. He's got to have a dozen or 2 dozen virtual machines set up. So what seemed to me is that it still comes down to ask yourself, what do you need to get the job done? It could be a sandbox, it could be a portable app, a VMware, a virtual machine, container, whatever. But define what you need before you go trying to stick that round peg in a square hole.
Yeah, for most of us, we don't need much, you know, much of anything except the more advanced users. Chris, of course, has a bunch of VMs. I have some VMs, and I want to use containers for the reason get to know containers. A, just to get to know them in my business line I'm in, and B, to I think would actually be useful for me to have a Bitbucket, which is a homebrew, which is your own copy of GitLab, basically, running that I can put stuff in and back up. And if I need to, I move the container and its database to a new system if I want to migrate it. But I don't have to migrate the whole operating system.
I was just reminded last night of why I'm on Linux. I have 2 or 3 machines running, and yesterday was what has affectionately been called Patch Tuesday.
Yep.
And okay, so forget about a cup of coffee. You need a pot of coffee to go through and the reboot and the rest of it. And in the past week, I probably did a handful of updates on my Linux machine. And each one of them took a click and a sip or maybe 2 sips out of my coffee cup, and it was done. Oh, by the way, I didn't have to reboot. And I wasn't really all that concerned about, is it going to be backwardly compatible with something that got installed? So just a reminder, take a look at what you need. I'm a big fan of get the hell away from Patch Tuesday and let's sit on Linux. And I'm only at 167 days of uptime on my Linux box. If I make it 167 hours on my Windows machine, I feel lucky.
Yeah, it's a good distinction to make that you just talked about, Andy. So when you talk about VMware or any virtualization software out there, what is the one that we use? What's the one that you guys use, the popular one? Bill, which one are you using?
VirtualBox or
Virtual
VMware.
box.
Yeah. So those are essentially, they virtualize the machine, right? The hardware. That's what they do. They virtualize the hardware
Yep.
and let you run multiple operating systems. What containers do is virtualizes the operating system, right? So that's the way to think about it. It creates multiple sandboxes inside of the same operating system. It's just like the VMware or the VirtualBox is creating multiple operating systems on the same hardware. So essentially, they're just layers of virtualization on top of each other. And if you think about it, when you run an app on your phone, for example, it does exactly the same thing. It creates a sandbox container on your phone, and it runs the app over there. That's how it guarantees that the app is not doing anything nefarious on your phone. So I think the find that you had, Bill, on BlendOS and installing those apps is actually very meaningful, as John said. I think that is something that we should dig into more, and maybe all of us should try it out, because that's a good way, I think, of installing new apps on Linux, is using that container technology.
Sounds like a homework assignment to me.
Yeah. And see, as I've said before, even if we screw up stuff, we still learn, because it causes commentary and discussion.
Yeah.
That's why I have no problem with doing stuff,
Yeah, as a virtual machine, you whack out what the heck.
Yeah, right.
The same with containers. You run it. I said it's a quick install. You just do whatever Docker run, give it the container name, it downloads it from the Docker hub, and you're up and running. In a few seconds, literally. And then you don't like it, you just remove the container image, and it's gone, right? And no traces left anywhere. It's all over.
Fascinating. So anyway, I think there really wasn't a whole lot else in OpenMandriva that I wanted to talk about. I mean, it's KDE environment on top of a usual distribution, and the fact that it was easy to install and automatically added the add-ins so you could do the screen resolution was a wonderful thing. So that's really all I had to talk about. So anybody's got anything else? We still got a few minutes left here, half hour.
Hey, Bill, did you at one time talk about CubesOS?
No, we haven't looked at that distribution. I know what you're talking about. I've heard of that on DistroWatch. But I think, once again, that's another one of those attempts at containerizing, to use a word.
Yeah, that's what I heard too.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, going forward, I mean, containerizing things sounds like a mechanism to add a layer of additional security to your system, so one thing can't mess unnecessarily with something else it's not supposed to. And maybe that's a direction that's happening more and more.
Absolutely, security is definitely the main benefit there. Second one being, you don't have to know all the files that you need to run that particular application, right? It's all packaged inside of the image. You just get it as in one shot.
Yeah.
Before containers came along, syncing up 20 different servers with all the right software you need was a nightmare, because they had programs to go ahead and make sure the files are all there. But darn it, if you had a dynamic load library that's different between two different operating systems, you can have nightmares getting everything working again. But with the container, you put everything you need, including dynamic loadables, into the container. And so one container has everything you need. You don't have to sync
Yeah,
anything, just copy the container.
yeah. And I think, given the
What-
fact that as time goes on, we have more and more resources available to us, that becomes easier to do without getting too much of a performance penalty. Yeah.
One additional benefit that we've seen recently, at least in the software development world in
Yeah.
containers, is the concept of dev containers. They call them dev containers. And this is directly talks to the problem that I believe Drew brought on earlier on, which is, you go to the internet, you find some source code repository, you want to install it, you want to download it, you want to compile it. Now you're going to have the problems that Drew had, which is, the make command, what do I do? What kind of files do I need? I'm missing all these blah, blah, blah settings.
Right.
Now with dev containers, what they do is the source code comes along with a container to compile it on your machine, so that this way, when I want to compile that source code, I just pull down the whole container, and the container has all of the tools that I need to compile that code.
Oh,
So let's say, you knew nothing about Golang or Java, but this application that you wanted to use is a Java app. Well, you just download the Java app, and along with it, there'll be a .dev container file. If that file exists in the repository, you can open up that file, that repository inside of a container, and magically all of the tools that you need to compile that file will be in the container. Java will be there, the right version of Maven will be there, the right libraries will be there. You just click the make button and you're done, right? So that's a big benefit for us these days in the software development world, as we do download software from the internet. So if you see any repository with a .dev container file in it, that's a very easy way to that you're not going to have. It's not going to take you much to get it up and running.
it's interesting.
Essentially, it's a container that contains all of the development tools that you need to compile that particular repository.
Interesting.
Very interesting, yeah. And by the way, the topic of containers was not one of the ones that Sergey was talking about previewing. So yet another topic to talk about in detail.
Hey, Sujit, on this whole topic of containers,
Mhm.
if you created a container, let's go back, try to bring in Drew's example. Drew was looking to compile RescueZilla or whatever, and do something. If you created a container to do that, and you downloaded the source code, and you had the tools and the toys and the rest of it, could you send that whole container as a single file over to Drew, where he could just have that container, everything is there already done for him?
Yeah. So that's why they have these things called container repositories. Okay, the most popular one these days is called Docker Hub. So if you search for Docker Hub, it's a repository of probably millions of containers. Okay, for different operations. There's many Windows containers, there's Linux containers, there's both, but there's mostly Linux containers there. And you can just, using the Docker command, using Docker commands, you can create your own container on your machine. You make sure that it's there's a file called the Docker file that you have to kind of author. It's a simple text file that you author. You say, this container image is going to contain these files, these utilities. I have to do this setup in this container, and you run the Docker build command and create a container image on your laptop. Okay, once you've tested it on your laptop, you can push that image to a Docker Hub repository, and when you push it, now Drew or anybody else can just say Docker run, give it the name of that Docker repository, and he's up and running. That's no fuss from his side. It'll run as if he never had to, he doesn't have to know anything about what's in that container. He'll just run it and it will do whatever it's supposed to do.
Very cool.
It's another level of abstract.
Yeah, yep.
And so that's why that I was saying the whole apps thing on BlendOS is based on the similar concept. I mean, they don't use Docker Hub. They have their own app store, but it's essentially the same thing. It's a hub of container images that do special things like running a web browser or running VS Code or whatever.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
You start pulling the little thread of BlendOS and it
Yeah.
all unravels into all of this.
Well, that's usually what happens, It doesn't take much to get this group talking about for Linux stuff for an hour and a half. Not a problem.
Well, this is all new. I mean, what we just learned tonight. Thank you so much, Sujit, for explaining this, because this is really all new for me.
Well, at
So
LXD,
I put a link to one of the containers that I have pushed out on Docker Hub a few months ago, I should say. And there's only 10,000 people downloaded. 10,000 times it's been downloaded. I don't know, but it's a little container that I created. And any of you can run it on your, just do Docker run and give it the name of that eShop on WebMVC, and it will just run it.
Where can I write Docker run?
On your, just open up your Ubuntu terminal or whatever you got, or WSL terminal, and just say Docker space run and give it the name of that container image, and it will run it immediately on your machine.
I had to somehow
You probably have to
Docker.
install Docker if you don't have it. Yeah, many of the distros have it beforehand, but otherwise you can just do sudo apt get Docker or something similar to that. But that's an example of where you'll get a full-fledged, in this particular example, if you run this, you have a full e-commerce application running on your laptop, right? It's essentially an eShop application running on your laptop, and you don't have to install anything. It's everything you need is right there. It'll just run. It basically sells t-shirts or something like that. But it's an example of how you just take everything that you need and put it into one file, and you don't need to know what program that file was written in. Happens to be written in .NET. I can tell you that, but you don't need to know that. You just run the container and your web server is running, and you can connect to it and you can do what you want with it. If you want to make money off it, it's up to you, but it's there.
There you go.
When you click on the link, it even tells you, give you an example of how you would run, how you would run it. I think there's a little command on the right there. But yeah, I certainly think containers is something all of you should play around with on your Linux distros, or even Windows. I use it on Windows using WSL, like John was saying, and it works just fine there as well.
how long would it take for a knowledgeable to install a doc for the Bitbucket and maybe a database as well, and whatever else Bitbucket needs?
It shouldn't be. I mean, most than likely there is like a Docker container image already out there for Bitbucket, and so you can just say Docker run whatever and give it the name of that image, and it should download and run it right away on your laptop with everything that's required.
Okay, now what happens if it needs a database? It's not in the doc.
If it needs a database, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's not in the doc itself, not in the container itself.
So then you would have to do before you run the Bitbucket one, you would run another container image for the database on your machine.
Yeah,
Make
that's
sure
what I
that's
was
up and
expecting.
running.
Yeah, I tried doing that once and it didn't work. Maybe sometime we can do it on my computer for an evening of this fun and games.
And then that's exactly why things like you talked about Kubernetes and whatnot. That's exactly what it's good for, right? In Kubernetes, you can combine both of these concepts into one system. You can say, hey, I'm going to build this I'm going to deploy this application into my Kubernetes cluster, and that application requires a database, a container image, and a web Bitbucket container image, and they are somehow connected to each other, right?
Yeah,
And
'cause I wouldn't be putting a whole lot of load on it though, but
yeah, in that case, you can just run it by hand. You just run a Docker run command for the database and another Docker run command for the Bitbucket container image, and you should be good to go.
yeah. I'm gonna be trying it again. I want to try it again sometimes.
Yep. Let me just ask a question there. While Sujit was talking, I saw something that said you are viewing Andy's whiteboard.
Yeah, I wanted to try to play with that a little bit. I didn't know I was sharing it already.
No, yeah. So what did you do? Just hit whiteboard?
Yeah.
And okay.
What I wanted to do, I
Yeah.
had, okay. Over there. Want to cooperate.
What did you do before?
Yeah, what did you do before?
Down in your,
Next to reactions, down at the bottom of the client.
Yeah. There's
And
something
it
that says
says
whiteboard.
Whiteboard. Click on that.
Yep.
I have 900 things open here, so I'm slowing down a little bit. And then it was just new whiteboard, and
I'm just wondering why
no. Reactions. It's not a reaction. The whiteboard is a function. It may be in the apps.
it's next on mine, on my Zoom client on Linux.
yeah.
It's all the way at the extreme right. It's to the right of reactions.
Yeah, right. It is on the Windows as well.
But it's not on mine.
Wow.
You didn't pay enough for your client.
It just came in on a recent version of Zoom whiteboard. So
Yeah,
maybe you've got an older version.
I'm using a fairly recent version of Zoom.
Yeah, I think I think just the last version or two that
They added whiteboard. Okay.
It's been there for a couple of versions now. A couple of the point versions.
Yeah, we try.
Yeah, 2 versions back it came. I mean, so, different question.
Go ahead.
Sujit mentioned WSL.
Yep.
I haven't been able to get past the command line with WSL. So is there some easy way to put in a command to bring up a desktop under WSL?
That's a good question, Richard. So what version of Windows do you have? Is it 10 or 11?
Yeah, it's 10, Windows 10.
So I think with 10, the version of WSL that comes with 10 has limited support for graphical applications. It's mostly command line, so that's what you're using. I have WSL and running on Windows 11, and that runs all of the X Windows applications. So essentially, you could run any KDE desktop or the file managers. I believe. John, did we record the? I think we demonstrated that, right? I think it was the top Windows programs. I think the session that I did.
It may have, but if you're using Windows 10, you need an X server running on Windows. There's one that's usually recommended, but the one that I use is MOBA Xterm, MOBA Xterm. And so you start up an X server on Windows, and then you can, and then that X server is the thing that will display what you ran from Ubuntu or whatever in WSL. But there are plenty of, now they're older descriptions of how to do that on the web. And I used to do that. And it works. You know, you can get an X, and it will open up each program like Xterm. It'll open up an Xterm window on Windows from Ubuntu, or you can start Firefox or Chrome or GIMP or anything, and it knows where you have to tell it by exporting the display variable in Linux and give it the IP address of your Windows machine where MOBA Xterm is running, where the X server is running. But that's how you do it in Windows 10. In Windows 11, Windows 11 has its own equivalent X server. So you don't even have to have MOBA Xterm running.
So how, if you have I have Windows 11, but I don't have ever tried running anything other than a command line utility. How would you start the Ubuntu desktop if Ubuntu Linux is what you have?
Well, I haven't been, you don't start a desktop because you've already got a Windows desktop. But whatever program you want to run.
Oh, okay. So you can load on individual apps.
Yes. Yeah. And what you do, you at the beginning you get a bash or various shells you can choose from, but I chose bash. And so that shows up in your Windows system, but it's not a normal bash. It's called bash, but it starts the Windows system and the whatever is it called, and then it pops up a command shell that you can execute in.
So can you run like an apt install and pick an application and have it loaded on
Yep.
WSL?
Yep. Once you get your initial shell going.
You're not loading it on WSL. You're on WSL. The way I do it is first I start up a PowerShell, and then I say WSL.
Right.
And WSL will start up the command by itself. WSL in PowerShell will start up the default application, the default version of Linux. But I've already installed Ubuntu there. Ubuntu, I've got Ubuntu 20.04, and if that's the only one there, I actually have Mint on there as well, right? So you can specify go into PowerShell and do a WSL -- help, and it'll show you all the things you can do. Once you've got a Linux instance installed on your machine, then you can start it with WSL in the hypervisor. Right. So once I've started that, in my PowerShell window, it switches over and gives me a bash command line. Now, in Windows 11, which is where I'm running it now, all you have to do is, you can, for example, say xeyes, XEYES, which is a simple X command that'll show you that it's done something and put these pair of eyes, whichever all of us should be familiar with, on your desktop. Now you know that it's done it. It's given you an X instance that is displayed on your Windows desktop. So now you don't usually want to use Xterm, but let's say you wanted to use LibreOffice. Okay, I installed LibreOffice on my Ubuntu instance in WSL, and then I can just type LibreOffice, and it opens up a LibreOffice window on my Windows desktop.
Now, I have a question. As far as the file system is concerned, if you do a file save, does it save it out to the Windows subsystem for Linux file system or to the Windows file system?
My instance of Ubuntu, when I log in, has a home directory. and I can store stuff in there, which is in the Linux Ubuntu file system.
Right. So
But
how would you,
I can also access all of my Windows files without any problem. And
how
I
would you move
use,
that file from one place to the other?
I use
There's a
move-
parallel files. Well, what happens, there's a directory tree under the Windows, oh, come on, WSL file system directory tree. That's got your Windows Linux directory trees, which has got a directory tree that has all the files in it, but it's also got additional information that meta information that Linux needs on top of the Windows information. And
Within WSL, you then put in the command to mount the Windows file system, the drive C.
Correct. You
Once
should
you've
do
done
a
that,
slash
then
mnt,
you
you should
should,
do a slash mnt slash c is and a slash mnt slash d for your C and D drives automatically.
Yeah.
That's typically done by
So
default.
you,
So
so you
once
can,
you've mounted them, then you can read and write to the Windows file directories.
okay, so you can't do it by default, but you can do it if you mount the file system.
Yes.
but I've never had a problem of a conflict between files. Of course, I can't run a Windows executable in Ubuntu.
Well,
I can't
well-
run a
yes,
Linux executable from my Windows command line, but I can move files back and forth. And in fact, because I'm good at Bash scripting and even Bash command line, if I want to duplicate a file structure, sometimes it's easier for me to do it by starting up Ubuntu in WSL and writing a for loop to move files around over in Windows.
Oh, so it's like if you created in LibreOffice a document and you saved it into your Ubuntu home directory in documents, and then you launched a web browser in Windows, logged on to Gmail, you would not be able to navigate in the Windows file system to that home directory where you have that document, could you?
I think it's available, but I generally don't save any files except scripts, like I might have a script or some text file or something like that in my home directory in Ubuntu. But if I'm going to save something from LibreOffice, the first thing is I wouldn't use LibreOffice in Ubuntu. I would use it on Windows. I just use it on Windows. I don't
Right.
need it. But you guys, and now we're talking about WSL to a bunch of people who don't want WSL anywhere near them, right? But
Well,
But
the reason why I'm asking is I use the Android subsystem for Linux.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the Android subsystem for Windows. And it has its own file system and it emulates an Android device. And if you download a file from the internet into a Linux app, into an Android app, it's not available for you in Windows. It's a different container.
well, the first step would be, as Sujit said, you can mount the Windows file system, and then it's over in /media and move stuff back and forth. Like I was just updating the club website today using CentOS in VirtualBox, and I have my Windows file system mounted, at least one folder mounted in CentOS. And so I move stuff back and forth from Windows to CentOS Linux, right? They're
Is there
just
somebody,
there.
is
It's
there somebody
media
out there
slash-
now that, is there somebody out there now that could paste in the chat the mount command for mounting a Windows drive in the WSL?
And I installed WSL way back when. I don't remember doing a mount command, but I do have my 3 drives.
Yeah,
My
the
3 Windows
WSL,
drives.
the WSL system cross mounts your Windows drives automatically.
But
does.
the other,
Under
the other
slash
thing,
MNT.
Drew,
Yeah, it's under one of the mount directories. You can find it. I'm trying to
I
start up
have
my
to-
old WSL system again. I'm having trouble.
The
Every
other
time I shut
consideration,
down
Drew,
CentOS and I restart it, I have to reestablish the mount. Maybe I don't have to do that, but I do. I open up a terminal window and I do an SU minus and I become root and I do everything in there. And the first thing I do is I go back and look in my history to see how did I mount this last time? And I
You can,
paste it in and do it.
You can automate
what-
it by putting it in and making an FS tab entry. So just edit your etc FS tab and just put the command in there. And it'll automatically mount it every time.
and Drew, the
That's
other
what the FS tab
consideration-
file is for.
The other
Yeah.
consideration is when you're talking about sharing files, you're dealing with the whole Linux versus Windows security of the system. So if you put something on your, hi, I'm a Windows user desktop, and now you come in and you're going to try to get there from WSL, you're going to have a path that's longer than your arm to get in there.
I wonder if you in Windows subsystem can you mount an app, run like an applet like SSH, and then transfer files via SSH back and forth between Windows and Linux.
Yes, you can,
Sure.
but what's convenient for me is I have a separate data drive. I keep my data on a separate file from the OS.
Oh,
And it's accessible no matter what OS or VM or XYZ I'm using.
yeah, I
But-
don't have
yeah,
that option right now.
But if you're not doing it that way, you don't need SSH. You can just mount the thing and copy files back and forth. I mean, the fact that I talked about using CentOS in a virtual machine, it's a virtual machine. There's some machine out there somewhere. I don't know where it is. It's got an IP address and I can ping my real machine or I can ping any other machine and
Right.
find out what its IP address is. And I can mount it. I can mount the other machine or I can share it. All these things.
Yeah.
Yes, what Andy says about permissions, because the permissions on files are different, but these guys have already worked out what the defaults are when you go between the two. So that I don't even worry about that. I mean,
Okay.
sometimes when I put something in I move something up to the Windows to the server where our website is hosted, I have to make sure that the file permissions are 755 and not 644 because the web server won't read the 644 files. They got to be 755. At least that's the way it appears. And so I just
Right,
do that.
right.
But no, if you just
Yeah.
try this, just try it. And
I will give it a try, because the reason why I'm asking is I've done extensive work over the last year on Windows 11 and the Android subsystem for running Android apps on Windows. And they initially, during the beta of before they released it to the public, the Android subsystem had its own IP address. And you could run a server, like a Samba server inside the Android and and just mount Windows shares back and forth between Windows. When they went final with it and production, they gave it the same IP address as the Windows machine. So they took away the ability for you to cross mount file shares.
Hey, Drew, if I guess Bill's running the show for this meeting, I'm not sure if I can share. If I can share my screen for all of 30 seconds, you can see what it
Let
looks
me
like
see
on my.
here. Let
I'd
me
love
get-
to.
Let's see it.
I'd love it.
Let me see if I can give you the permissions. See, I see your, what's,
Let me
wait a minute.
post disable participant screen sharing.
Usually you show up as with two entries, one for the phone and one for,
No, I'm just in there as me.
You're just in here as you.
Yeah,
the
I
gol-
know, I was confusing too many people.
Just make him a co-host.
The
Yeah,
golfers.
okay, I'll make you a co-host. Yeah. Okay, you're now a co-host, Andy.
Okay, I'm a co-host. I'm going
So-
to share screen. Let's see. We're going to share the whole desktop.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, Andy has started screen sharing. Oh, there it is.
Yep, there we
Okay.
go.
All right.
And why it looks so crazy, because I'm going from my Linux box through a remote desktop to a Windows box.
Okay.
Oh,
And
you're
this-
using Windows Remote Desktop software?
Except on Linux, it's called Remina,
Yeah,
R-E-M-M-I-N-A.
Remina. Yeah, right.
Right.
Okay, so, and this is the Windows terminal application.
Got it.
Okay.
And so one of the things, I have a command, cmd.com replacement over here. It's the old, like the old 4DOS.
Okay.
And, okay, and I do different colors. There's my legacy. And I haven't done anything. I put WSL on way back when. Now, if I just do a mount command here, there you go.
C, D, and E.
Yep.
And now, did it do that for you?
I don't
No, no.
remember. I think it did. And if I do a try that. Yeah, I don't have any entries in my SCFS tab. So Sujit, unless you can explain, I have no clue.
So maybe it does it by itself.
And on a good day, on a good day, I can sell Linux. So
Wow. My machine is already fully maxed out with its hard drive, so I can't create another partition or add another drive or.
well, these are existing drives. I have a okay. Let's go over.
So if I.
While Andy's working that, can somebody tell me in one sentence or less how you download the chat as text?
Oh,
Down by where you can send a text to the right is 3 dots.
Open up the chat where you can
Yeah.
see the people chatting.
Right.
At the very bottom, there's a row of little icons. There's a smiley
Okay.
face. You see the smiley face?
Yeah.
Direct to the right of that are 3 dots.
Actually,
Yeah, but
mine,
to the left of it, mine says file. And if you
Yeah.
click
If you don't have-
file,
It's right to the right where it says text to everyone
Oh,
is the 3
okay.
dots.
I got it. I got the save chat thing come up. That's pretty well hidden. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Now, where does it
And-
put it?
it'll
But-
put it inside the Zoom folder.
Okay.
Click on save chat again, and it should say show folder.
At the end of the window, at the end of the Zoom meeting, on my computer, it opens up the folder, but it's typically underneath your documents folder. It should create a Zoom folder
Yeah.
and then today's date.
Yeah.
All right. I can find it now that I figured out how to save it. That's good.
Drew,
No
here-
problem.
Hey,
yeah, there's a Zoom folder under documents if you're on
not
Windows.
to play with Mr. Roberts on everybody, but remember, we're past the top of the hour. So,
Right, Drew. Just a quickie. They're my disks. I have 2 physical disks. I have an SSD and one with platters. The one with platters is partitioned.
Yep.
Everything's NTFS. So
yep.
if I put something out on D or E, I'm just dealing with regular folders.
So you can copy it to /MNT/E.
Yeah,
No, I
Well-
don't even have to. I can do watch. /MNT.
It's just D, no colon.
Just D, yes.
LS.
All right, so now you've got,
And okay, so here's the root of my D drive. And if I go
Yep.
over here and I do
oh,
D
sweet.
colon,
Oh,
same
sweet.
damn thing.
Sweet.
And Andy, if you go to here and do CD/etc in the WSL terminal.
Back to home.
CD/etc and then cat mtab. So cat mtab.
TAB.
One word. TAB. Enter. That's interesting. Why don't you have that?
Well, I'm dealing with an old.
Yeah, but he's on D drive now. Oh,
Right,
no,
cat FS tab. I wonder if it's the older one that has a just cat FS tab. It's just
You guys saw it,
FSTAB.
though. Yeah,
That's fat fingers.
yeah, we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in my Linux, it's under mtab. I have all the mount commands for the C drive in there. So that's how WSL does it. I don't know in this one how it did it in the older versions, but yeah.
Okay.
So there is some reference in there which is making it mount like to John's command. Every time you boot the WSL, it remounts all those drives.
Well, mine comes
based on
up
the
the same
settings.
way, but here you go. Watch this. An oldie but a goodie. I haven't done anything with it. Yes, I can use a basket command line, but I'm not installing anything. I'm on a 15-year-old computer.
Don't forget to do apt update. You got to do that regularly in WSL too.
So Drew,
Yep.
you can
Okay, at any rate. Oh, by the way, no comment because there are no icons there. Very cool Linux utility or Windows utility. Hides the desktop icons. Ink. Everything's gone.
right,
gonna
that's
give this a try,
just
just
a
as soon as
feature
we-
of the Linux of the Windows desktop. Show hide desktop icons.
That's on the Linux desktop. This is Windows.
Yeah, that's a feature of the Windows desktop.
Yeah, right click anywhere on that Windows desktop. It says view at the top. Go over there and go down and it says show desktop with a check mark. If you click.
Okay. This is too many clicks.
Well, some people are quicker at it.
Yeah, I know.
Holy moly.
So Drew, you got a whole bunch of answers to some questions here, but
While we were talking, while you guys were talking, I opened up a PowerShell, opened up an Ubuntu window, went to /mnt/c, and I'm looking at my whole C drive.
Yep.
Bingo.
There you go.
So yeah, it was already there.
Yeah, it's already here.
I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Okay.
Pay no attention to the horizontal or the vertical.
Thank you so much for this. This was very useful.
And you can get MOBA Xterm free for Windows. And then you'll be able to go from a Windows 10 WSL Linux and display GUI, Linux GUI.
Okay. Hey,
So-
Bill Chris, my compliments. Boy, you really had a full agenda put together for tonight.
Boy, you got that right. You know how much of an agenda it was, Andy, right?
I do.
But it always
It
seems
was-
to
it
take
was-
up 2 hours and sometimes a little bit more.
Very enjoyable. Trust
Well-
me, it's not the company or the topics, it's the hour.
It's the hour, yep. We got to say goodbye for now.
Yeah.
In MOBA Xterm, there are
It's a-
two versions, a portable or an installer. Any recommendation of which way to go?
Which
Or-
one?
what was that?
Which one are you? What app?
What are you talking about,
MOBA
Richard?
Xterm, you can download a portable version or an installer version. And so any recommendation as to which way to go?
Oh,
Probably the regular one because that way it'll be easier to update probably.
Yeah.
You might even be able to tell it to just to update. Or
Portable
checklist that
or-
does auto updates.
Portable or installer of what?
Mobile X term.
That mobile X term that John was talking about.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. So maybe with
Thank
the
you
install,
again. Thank you
with
again,
a bit of
everyone.
luck,
Have a good night, gentlemen.
hatch my PC.
I
might
installed it.
Include it.
Yeah, mobile, portable apps are more for USB sticks or stuff like that, when you want them more, you need them portable, or you really want to just not temporarily try something
Right,
without
right.
affecting your system.
Yep. Okay, folks. I think I want to hit the end button here. It's been a pleasure. And next month we'll do it again with either the same or different topics.
Okay, we had a full agenda because all the members here are full of it.
You got it. Excellent.
Well, if
Good
I
point.
can, I'll remember to send out an email about a sample
Right,
program that you can work on for something simple.
Highly.
Well,
sure. Okay. Good night, guys. Been a
Good night.
pleasure. Okay, bye.
Good night,